is like another amazing example of how Bethel works together to solve problems. And also, it's Murphy's Law, because I was telling you before that Carol Goodman Kaufman is actually my Makatutum, my son's mother-in-law, my daughter-in-law's mother. I've known her for many, many years, and I always know that she throws herself fully into everything she does. I've seen her in action many years. She's a great cook. She's a wonderful writer, and I've seen her in action through many of her projects. She originally was a psychologist and a criminologist who reached her limit on research and writing about abuse and violent extremism. She now writes about happy subjects such as food, travel, and anything else that catches her fancy. In addition to her freelance work, she pens 2 regular columns about food history, one for the Worcester Telegram and Gazette, and one in the Jewish Leader, which hopefully you're all reading her column, which have a wonderful variety of discussions about Jewish food. She also writes mysteries and children's books. And through the years, I've seen her grow in her abilities, and I've seen her working very hard on her mysteries and her children's books. And I believe she has an upcoming mystery that will be coming out, and a children's book, maybe 2 children's books, I believe, that are already in print. So she's very accomplished. We're lucky to have her. I'm lucky to have her as my Makatunim. And it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's topic, which is a history of the bagel, a real Schmear campaign, and our speaker, Carol Goodman Kaufman. Thanks a lot for agreeing to be with us, and enjoy, everyone.
Artie, thank you for that wonderful introduction. If my mother were alive, she'd be felling to hear such nice things about me. Maybe she's coming. Maybe she hears it now. Who knows?
She probably does.
And thank you for inviting me to talk about one of my favorite foods, one of our Ashkenazi family's favorite foods, the bagel. And since a major part of the story of the bagel takes place in Connecticut, Waterford really is a perfect place to start to talk about it. So what is a bagel? Well, until the latter half of the 20th century, most Americans outside of Ashkenazi Jews had no idea what a bagel was. In fact, in 1944, something happened that put the bagel in the news. And this is from the Associated Press of February 14th, 1944. I'm going to read it directly from the newspaper. February 14th, Valentine's Day. In some ways, this was a Valentine's Day massacre, except there was a happy ending. The theft of a truckload of 1,560 bagels today confronted police with a mystery. They wanted to know what a bagel was. The police officer on duty actually said, "What is a bagel?" Sam Eater of Fisher's Bakery explained. He said, "A bagel is a roll with a hole in the middle. Some people like them for breakfast." It was Manhattan's first theft of the kind. "Theft of diamonds, yes," said Detective Lieutenant Ben Miller. "Even fur coats and baby blankets, but bagels, never." The bakery, its truck gone, poured, I like this word, 1,560 new bagels and delivered them by taxi cab. Then police found the truck abandoned. The thief, apparently a non-fancier of bagels, had left the consignment intact. So that's the first time we hear about bagels really in American culture outside of the family. As Mr. Eater said, a bagel is a roll with a hole. Some people call it a donut with rigor mortis, however. It is a ring of yeasted wheat dough with a hole in the middle, boiled in water, and then baked. Now that's the key to a real bagel. The origin of the word bagel is a bit unclear. However, many experts agree that it probably comes from the Yiddish word begen, which means to bend, not Menachem Begin, but begen, to bend. And please excuse my accent. I do not speak Yiddish or German. Now, way back in the late 13th century, believe it or not, there was a time in Polish history in which Jews were considered citizens and they were tolerated. Unlike most other countries in Europe, Poles identified themselves as citizens of their country and not by religious, ethnic, or linguistic origins. So this mindset created the environment where Jews were first allowed the opportunity to bake and then sell bread. Now, it didn't happen all at once. The breakthrough came in from Polish Prince Boleslaw the Pious in 1264, who said, Jews may freely buy and sell and touch bread like Christians. Now, why couldn't they? Why couldn't they touch bread before that? Any ideas? Oh, everybody's muted. Nobody's gonna. Okay, I'll give you a hint. Because of the holy Christian connection between bread, Jesus, and the sacrament, the host, it was considered that Jews shouldn't touch the host. They might be touching Jesus, who was a Jewish boy, by the way, but let's not tell them that. But so at some point, they were allowed to bake, but the reprieve did not last for long. Just 3 years later, a group of Polish bishops forbade Christians to buy any foodstuffs from Jews. Why? Because, of course, we might have put some poison in there for the unsuspecting Gentile. At some point, this theory goes, Jews were allowed to work with bread that was first boiled. It had to be boiled first, and they created the bagel to comply with that law. Let's jump to the 14th century now. The Polish economy is doing really well, and they need workers. So people are coming from Germany to Poland to find work, including Jews. Now, they had brought with them the brezel, which is the pretzel, another bread that is boiled and then baked. But theirs is boiled in hot soda water. Oh, and let me show the picture. There we go, the brezel. Looks like a pretzel, right? It's boiled and baked, but it's boiled in hot soda water. Okay. At the same time, a similar bread product was being developed in Krakow. So this is the brezel coming from Germany. And in Krakow, a document dated as far back as 1394, March 2nd to be precise, mentions the Polish word for rings of the queen, or oberżanek, obviously round. See, oberżanek, sort of looks like maybe more like a pretzel than a bagel, but this became very, very popular. It was also boiled and baked, and the popularity of this oberżanek grew tremendously when the Queen Jadwiga opted to eat the oberżanek during Lent. Apparently it's very popular. It was only allowed to be baked during Lent, boiled and baked during Lent, in lieu of the more richly flavored breads. Well, that became very popular. Now, it wasn't such a sacrifice for her to only eat this oberżanek. Why? Because white bread was not available to the peasants. Wheat was very hard to come by, therefore very expensive. So only people with money, people with nobility, and people of wealth could afford to eat white bread. So it wasn't a street food like we see today that you could buy anywhere. So Queen Jadwiga was eating her bagel, her oberżanek, along with her wealthy friends. So the oberżanek was for the rich. Why she chose for her, many Poles at the time, of course, were very poor, and they could barely afford the rye flour for that coarse, very, very rough bread. So that's what they had. Then we get to the early 17th century. And all of a sudden, bagels are popular among Jews. And the first known written reference among the Jewish population to the bagel was found in Yiddish regulations in 1610, issued by the Jewish Council of Krakow. They outlined how much Jewish households were permitted to spend in celebrating a Brit Milah, a bris. Why? To avoid making the Gentile neighbors envious. And also to make sure that poorer Jews weren't living above their means. Now, wouldn't that be nice to have a rule like that today, limiting how ostentatious bar mitzvahs could be? But that was the rule then, and people really obeyed the rules back then. So, also, the thing about the bagel's round shape had sort of a mystical Baba mice about it, that because like round loaves of challah at Rosh Hashanah, that symbol of full and complete year. It was felt that a round bagel would bring good luck in childbirth, and it would symbolize a long life. So bagels were often brought to newlyweds as a little new get moving already. And b'sha'at tova, everything should come at the right time. Okay, so we've got the German bretzel coming into Poland. You've got the Oberżane coming in from in Krakow in Poland, and the Jews had come in from Germany to Poland. So there's a mixture right there already. Things are starting to boil, as it were. Then let's just jump over to Austria for a minute. In 1683, there was a Viennese baker who wanted to show his very deep gratitude to the King of Poland, Jan Sobieski. What did the king do? Well, he saved Austria from an invading Turkish army. Now, the king was known as quite the horseman. So this baker made the Bagel. And again, excuse my accent. He reshaped the bread, the round bread, into the king's stirrup. And the new bread was called Bagel, which is derived from the German word for stirrup, which is Steigbügel. And that's it, the Bagel. So you can sort of see, it sort of looks like more like a bagel, doesn't it? Now, also at this time, the king allowed Jews previously barred from the guild of ring-shaped bread bakers. Now there's a niche market, the ring-shaped bread bakers to make bagels. So now the Jews can bake. Now wheat flour became increasingly available, and Jewish bakers proliferated selling bagels to Jews and non-Jews alike. Now, bagel bakeries back in 19th century Poland seem to have served the same role that cafes did later and cafes do today, where young people in the Jewish community would gather. And what did they gather? What did they do when they gathered in these cafes, in these bakeries? They would discuss new radical political ideas. And that's where socialism started, right? In Europe, in Eastern Europe, in Russia, people were talking about these things. Socialism, communism, Zionism, anarchism, all kinds of things they talked about. So bakeries were safe spots. No, I mean, everybody had to go to a bakery to buy bread, right? So there was no suspicion of what were you doing in the bakery. People of all political stripes, all ages, went to see the baker regularly. So stopping by to score a six pack of bagels wouldn't raise any suspicions. So when the bagels came over here to the United States with the Eastern European immigrants of the late 19th century, their left-leaning politics came with them. So now we're into the 20th century, the beginning of the 20th century. While they started their culinary career as food for the well-off, bagels over the years became a popular street food, an everyday street food associated with poverty, not wealth. And when times were tough, in Poland, many poor Jews took to selling bagels on the street as a last resort, as a way to earn a few kopecks, right? When there was no other way available. And this is where the hole comes in. See, they would be the hole could be used to thread strings or dowels through groups of bagels, therefore making it more practical and much easier to handle and transport without fear of dropping. So that's where the hole comes from for the bagel. Now, although bagels clearly had multi-ethnic origins in Europe, particularly in Poland, here in the US, they became fairly quickly associated with Jewish culture, but not just any Jewish culture, Ashkenazi Jewish culture. Of the Sephardic Jews who came here, they were much earlier and didn't have that. That did not have the bagel culture with them. And our Sephardi and Mizrahi cousins over in the Middle East had pita and lafa and other kinds of breads. They hadn't heard from bagels. So left-leaning, the bagel became Ashkenazi comfort food. Next, bagel bakers worked under very difficult conditions, often in unventilated basements, toiling 14 hours a day, 16 hours a day. Oh boy, is that me doing that on the screen? Oh, don't look at me. 6 or 7 days a week, even 7 days a week. How could that have been a kosher bagel? Well, let's not even get into that. They would curl up in the corner of the basement and sleep there. And it was a schwitzbass. It was very, very hot. It was very difficult. So the Bagel Bakers Union, bagel spelled B-E-I-G-E-L, Bakers Union, was established in the early 1900s in, of course, New York City. Its craftsmen were the primary makers of New York bagels. These were all prepared by hand. Then in 1964, the BEI Bagel Makers Union joined the Bakers and Confectioners Union and became Local 338. Now, remember all those guys in Poland talking socialism? They established the local union of bagel bakers. However, it was picketing got workers better conditions, pay and benefit, but at its peak, Local 338, the only bagel bakers union in the country, obviously nobody was in Nebraska baking bagels, only 300 members representing 36 bakeries. And only fathers, sons, and maybe a nephew or a son-in-law were allowed into the secret society, because those were the rules that mandated only family members could join, and they held the secrets to bagel baking. Until the 1960s, when a grandson of a bagel baker decided to invent new ovens and bagel shaping machines, and the revolution took over. It started the bagel's journey to assimilation and the breakdown of the union. Now, first, the advent of the machine-made bagels in the 60s led to its end as an independent organization in the 1970s. But the final nail in the coffin also came in the 60s. Anybody know who that guy is? He's one of the Lucchese's. The Lucchese and the Genovese families, the mafia families, took over American Kosher Provisions and Consumer Kosher Provisions, two major producers of bagels, and bled them dry. Now, the Union won a few battles, but ended up losing the war. Now, if you look at the Hebrew on the right there, it says Bagel Mafia, but mafia in Hebrew means bakery. So Bagel Mafia was a play on words. You see the machine guns there. But the Lucchese's and the Genovese's bled them dry, and that was the end of the bagel. Between that and machine-made bagels, that was the end. Okay, then we're into the 1970s. Suddenly, ethnic food is becoming trendy. Bagels are now found in Omaha, Nebraska. They may not be as good as the ones in New York, but they're there. And they emerged mostly from a Jewish niche market into the mainstream. So bagels were sold directly to customers. Hand shaping shifted to machine rolling. Boiling was switched to the less time-consuming steaming. And bakeries opted out of stone ovens in favor of standard steel. And then but back up a little bit before that, remember who established in 1927 in Connecticut, in New Haven, their own bakery. Now, they had been in the bakery business, but in the 60s, they started with the machine making. And they were 80 miles north of New York City. So they weren't under the scrutiny of the union or the mafia. So they were doing very well in New Haven. And then in the 1970s, don't do that. They started the sliced and frozen bagels, and bagels took off around the country. Now, next, Lender's Bagels was so successful that in 1984, Kraft Foods bought them out. Now, why was this such a big deal? Because Kraft Foods owns Philadelphia cream cheese. And in some marketing, advertising guy's brain, they decided to call this the wedding of the century. Philadelphia cream cheese on Lender's Bagels. We've probably been putting cream cheese on bagels for quite some time, but this was a major marketing ploy for them. And then from there, of course, Sunday brunch. Now, I'm going to take a little side trip for a minute. You see up in the top around 1 o'clock, you'll see some lox, bagels. The other night, we were having dinner with friends, and our friend Toby, he should be nameless, of course, Toby, told me that lox got the name from the Scottish lochs, the lakes, because that's where the best salmon came from. I thought, wow, I've never heard that story before. I looked it up and it's not true. Lox turns out to be a worldwide word used. It's a Proto-Indo-European word. You see it many places. In some places they call it gravlax, but lox simply means salmon. And for some reason it's used around the world, as is like the word ananas, which is pineapple in multiple words, in multiple languages. But so lox and smoked salmon are different. Lox is brined, pickled really, sort of like a ceviche in brine, whereas salmon, Nova, Scottish salmon, all that are smoked, cold smoked salmon. There's also hot smoked salmon, but you don't put that on your bagel. So just as a little side, Sunday brunch became incredibly popular. Now, today, Americans spend $750 million, that's billion with a B, on bagels every year, whereas only $500 million on donuts. So that tells you how popular bagels are. Now, over the course of the 20th century, bagels got softer and sweeter as they moved out of New York's Lower East Side and into the middle of the country. The puffed up American bagel with raisins and blueberries, seriously, blueberries, bears little resemblance to the dense and chewy rings that our ancestors ate in Eastern Europe, but it is now eaten across the United States. Thomas's bagels. Now, actually, our friend Toby, who thinks lox comes from Scottish lakes, likes Thomas's bagels, but he's not Jewish, so we'll excuse him. New York Times late great columnist William Safire wrote this: the formerly chewy morsel that once had to be separated from the rest of its ring by a sharp jerk of the eater's head is now devoid of character, half-baked, seeking to be all pastry to all men. I love that quote. Except for Montreal bagels, which are totally different. And I know Ilana and Adam really like these from when they lived up in Vermont. Montreal bagels are a different breed entirely. Authentic Montreal bagels are boiled, but they're boiled in water with honey or malt. And as a result, they're sweeter than the New York bagels. But the bigger difference is that they're cooked in wood-fired ovens, which gives them a crunchier, sort of irregular surface, somewhat charred. They're crunchier, they're crispier, and they have a richer crust flavor. But they also shine because of their bath in the honey water. Now, irony of ironies, hand-shaped bagels are coming back. Now, of course, everything has to be artisan, right? So now we have artisan-shaped bagels, and people are baking them at home. And the bagel has come full circle as it is. Now, if you would like to have a more in-depth look at the history of the Bagel, The Surprising History of Unmodest Bread by Maria Bolinska. And now, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. I hope I have the answers. No questions.
Maybe you could stop sharing your screen for a moment.
Yeah, I will stop.
I have a question, Carol.
Sure.
Why are bagels so fattening?
Why are they so fat or fattening?
Fattening.
Fattening? Well, probably because they're huge now. They're much bigger than they were in the olden days. And we put cream cheese. The lox, the smoked salmon doesn't have a lot of calories, but the cream cheese does. Nobody puts a very thin layer of cream cheese, do they? They smear it on. And actually, I remember while I was in college, I went to visit, it was after college, I went to visit my college roommate and her new husband in their apartment in Queens. And they served bagels for breakfast. And I put some cream cheese on. And I remember Barry saying, "What? That's not cream cheese." And he took a huge scoop and slathered it on my bagel. He said, "That's the way you eat cream cheese on a bagel." He must have put that much on. But yeah, that's why it's fattening. I see someone, Bruce Levine. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Yes, yes. When did cream cheese start being called a Schmear?
That's a good question. I have no idea. It's a Yiddish word, right? It must have been all as soon as the first spread went on, I imagine.
I remember growing up in New York City, and my father took me to luncheonettes for cream cheese and bagel, and he'd always say to the clerk, "How about a bagel with a schmear?" And he knew exactly what my father meant, and I was wondering where that came from.
I don't know, but the word has entered the lexicon, the American lexicon, hasn't it? People you would never imagine knew the word, know it, if they'd been in New York. There's Stuart Miller.
In honor of this event tonight, for supper, we are having pizza bagels.
Great.
Which I picked up at ShopRite in New London. And there's a book called Jews of New Haven, volume 9, and they have a long article about the Lender family of New Haven, Connecticut, who my family belonged to the same synagogue as the Sam, Murray, and Marvin, and their father Harry Lender. So that's my connection. Okay.
So Brotherhood breakfasts on Sunday must have all had bagels.
Whenever the men's club had Sunday breakfasts, they could get all the bagels they needed. That was not a problem. So Sam Lender replaced the hood ornament on his Cadillac with a silver bagel. This is not made up.
That's great.
Yeah. And here's well, you can't see it too good here, but this is a picture of the Lender family. Harry, Murray, Michael, Sam, and Marvin. So, okay. All right. That I thought I'd throw this stuff in. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm learning so much. Artie, I think you're muted.
So what's your opinion about, I mean, I grew up in New York City, and there is a sort of a snobbery that it was the water of New York City that made their bagels so special and addicting.
That's funny you mentioned that. I just saw an article the other day that said that's a myth. It's not the New York water. Yeah. But maybe they boil it correctly. It could be that they actually make them correctly in New York and other places don't. Although I will say that the Price Chopper supermarket, which happens to have a kosher bakery in Worcester, has delicious bagels. And even New Yorkers who come here say, gee, this is a good bagel. But of course, it's huge. It's not like the original. And you wonder why we're getting fatter. It's because these things are enormous.
Yes. Mm-hmm. They've grown along with our waistlines.
Yes, indeed. Or our waistlines have grown along with the bagels. Yes.
I think Stan Solinsky has a question.
Oh, okay. I can't see everybody here, so let's see.
Just a brief comment. I'm not sure if folks are aware, but Philadelphia cream cheese has nothing to do with Philadelphia whatsoever. Of course, Kraft, I think somebody may have made it and it was purchased by Kraft, but they just liked the idea that Philadelphia had a reputation for good food or something, and they decided to name it Philadelphia cream cheese. But there's, it's really a New York product. So just as a point of information, don't think of the city of Philadelphia when you have Philadelphia cream cheese. That was it.
You just burst my bubble, Stan. Oh, I'm
sorry. Sorry, guys.
Right. And I like Philadelphia on my bagels, but I prefer temp tea cream cheese on my matzah.
Okay.
It's a lot easier to spread.
Good.
Yes. Ira Cohen, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm snobbish too from New York City, and I would never consider Lender's a bagel.
Yes, that's a common. Although I wonder what the bagels were like at the original bakery before they were sliced and frozen. They could have been the real thing.
Even the size is not good. My older daughter lives in Needham, and they have pretty good bagels there as well.
Yeah, Needham, yeah. Mm-hmm. I think that's Einstein's they have there.
Cafe Bagel.
Cafe Bagel. Okay. I see another hand. Oh, that's my granddaughter, Naomi. You wanted to ask a question, sweetie?
No, I wanted to. What can you tell us more about the connection between crime and carbs?
Crime and carbs. It's a crime the way I eat too many carbs. How's that? Yeah.
Tell us more about the gangsters.
No. The mafia. I don't know that much about them, except the fact that they took over the they took those American kosher provisions and what's the other one called, consumer kosher provisions, yeah, and just, you know what they do, they go into, whether it's trash removal, whatever business the mafia got into, they would come in, use it for money laundering purposes, take the cash out and destroy the company. Mafia business is not particularly in my wheelhouse. Violent extremists, I can tell you, but they're not interested in bagels. But I think it's very clever to have mafia.
Yeah.
Bagel mafia was a nice play on words. Oh, Barbara Dean, I know you.
What Artie was referring to with the water before was there was a cooking show on, and they gave people in like 3 or 4 different cities around the country the exact same recipe to make bagels. And everyone agreed that the New York ones were the best. And that's where he got the idea, well, where they said that it must have been the water, because what else? All the ingredients were exactly the same.
I actually believed that until I read this thing the other day that said, no, it's a myth. But the water is different. In fact, when I bake challah every week, I'm married 45 years, I've been baking challah every week. I only take off for childbirth. That's it. And that has been a while, frankly. When I was baking in the Berkshires, I had to use filtered water. The water was so hard that I couldn't use it. It was making the challah not rise. So there has to be something in the water. And who knows if that article was true? Who knows that the article that said it was a myth? That could have been a myth. You never know what to believe today on the news.
I think Len Cohen has a question.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I spent my first 10 years were in Brooklyn, and I remember taking a glass of tap water, and you had to let it stand until it cleared up. It was so foggy when you got it out of the tap. So I'm assuming that was the ingredient that you needed in the bagels.
And we were always told that was air, that those were air bubbles. You hope it was air, not something else.
True.
Any other questions? Hi, Tom. No other questions? Well, this has been delightful. Thank you so much for inviting me. I see some familiar faces from our daughter's wedding. I see some family members. And I'm so pleased to meet the rest of you, even those of you without pictures.
Well, thank you very much, Carol. I'm sorry about the beginning, but fortunately it all worked out, and maybe I'll know how to do this next time. It was really a very fascinating talk. We really appreciate it. It was great, and we had a wonderful attendance. And let me just mention to everyone that our next talk, the first Tuesday in February, will be Robert Levin talking about the Jewish Legion, his grandfather, and early Zionism.
Oh, neat. That sounds good. Can I come?
Please join us. Absolutely. We do it the first Tuesday of every month.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye.
Carol.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Great job.
Happy New Year. Good
Great
job.
job.
Bye, sweetheart.
Oh, they're beautiful. The girls are beautiful. Yeah, Adam's.
So is this the same link for Minion?
No, it's a different link for Minion. So if you're going to join Minion, please leave and then come back in.
Yes.
Okay, bye-bye.
Come to Minion, folks. Come to Minion.
Who's providing the bagels for the after talk dinner? Where are the bagels?
Artie, when you come back in March, we're going to do a bagel breakfast, right?
I'll let you know about Boca Bagels.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
We will.
Okay.
Well.
Bye-bye. I'm going to end it now.